All right, now, a couple of things. Yes, that is one of my most favorite steam locomotive Lego trains that I own. Now, if you do not mind, I'm going to quickly rush over and grab it so that I can talk a little bit more about it and kind of show it off. So, if you don't mind me, just give me a minute. Now, if you have no idea as to why I am showing this bad boy off, well, you might want to take a guess as to what it is. Now, it's not necessarily that we're learning about trains, so much so as we are learning about the technology behind it. Now, the cool thing about this is it is one of the very first types of a steam locomotive. It's not necessarily realistic in the idea that it was a pure creative thing, but it was based on some of the very first types of steam locomotive trains. Now, one of the reasons that I personally like this is, and you can't see it yet because it's kind of flashy, but it is a beautiful specimen just by itself. Okay. Now, the other thing is this. I love this right here. Now, if you can't read that backwards, what it says is it says Constitution. And what I like to think about it is we're rolling away from the Constitution into more important matters. We've spent quite a lot of time talking about the United States Constitution. Now we're wanting to talk more about the American Manifest Destiny, as well as your Industrial Revolution. Now, at the time, all the way back to, honestly, if you could think about it, to when we first started gaining independences and for more free land, well, one of the things that happened is we started moving west. And it wasn't necessarily until this idea of manifest destiny that really presented itself that we kind of caught on to what we were doing and wanted to do more of it. So this bad boy was created to help with that idea. It was able to move people faster, more efficiently, but it cost a lot more. It cost to create the rail lines as well as to create the path for the rail line. If we had to go through a mountain, well, 9 times out of 10 we didn't. We went around it. So with that in mind, let's move into the Industrial Revolution. The start of the American Industrial Revolution. It first began in Great Britain, and it gradually spread to other parts of Europe, the United States, and later to the rest of the world. With it, it brought change. Before the Industrial Revolution, weavers and craftsmen worked at home, spinning wool, cotton, and linen by hand into the finished cloth that we liked so much. This was known as the domestic system. Domestic just basically means at your house. The Industrial Revolution began in Great Britain in the 1760s. Britain had already enjoyed many advantages, including a powerful middle class, a colonial empire to supply it with raw materials, plentiful coal to run its machines, and a prosperous agriculture in which fewer people were needed to work on the farm. New inventions propelled change. 2 important British inventions helped trigger the Industrial Revolution. The spinning jenny, which allowed several threads to be spun at once, permitting many threads to be made quickly and inexpensively, as well as James Watt's improved steam engine, which made steam power available for mechanical purposes. Steam power could be used to drive many machines at once. The steam engine led to the construction of large factories, the invention of the steamboat, and the development of the railroad trains, which I just kind of showed y'all, and it's sitting down there now. The shift from home to factory. You've already learned that in the 1790s. Wow, been a late one, guys. I apologize. Samuel Slater had begun producing cotton thread by machine in a factory in New England. In Massachusetts, Francis Cabot Lowell, a successful merchant, and other investors built new factories during the War of 1812. In factories, workers could supervise and could use machines driven by water or steam power, resulting in increased production. As the production of textiles and other goods increased, their prices fell. So the more product you can crank out, the more of it you have. With the more of it, you don't have to spend so much to gain it. With lower prices, consumer demand rose for textiles. People could now afford factory-made clothes. Producers were able to produce for mass markets at home and internationally, not just for a few local customers. As demand grew, more and more factories were built, employing ever larger machines and greater numbers of workers. These changes set in motion the chain reaction known as the Industrial Revolution, which was the rise of the factory system, the use of the steam power, as well as the mass production of goods, which is the Industrial Revolution. Mass production and interchangeable parts. Using machinery and steam power, factories produced thousands of yards of cloth each day. Soon, factories even began producing other types of goods. Factory goods were mass-produced. Manufacture of goods in large quantities using standardized designs so that all goods produced are the same. As you learned in the last chapter, Eli Whitney made an important contribution in the standardizing of parts, making them interchangeable from one item to the other. This made manufacturing easier and less costly. As the Industrial Revolution spread, more and more goods were made in factories. People began buying more manufactured goods rather than relying on making almost everything for themselves. The development of railroads. In England and America, inventors applied the steam engine to a wheeled wagon moving along a track, creating the first railroad locomotive. The railroad revolutionized land transport. By 1840, railroad lines crisscrossed parts of America. Most important of these was the New York Central, which ran parallel to the Erie Canal. The railroad expanded land transportation just as the Erie Canal had expanded water transport. The telegraph. The spread of railroads was accompanied by the invention of a telegraph, which is a device for sending and stopping electrical impulses, which provided a faster way to communicate. The telegraph, which received its first practical demonstration in 1844, made instant communication with the entire nation a reality. So, welcome to cell phones and everything else that you have right now. Thanks to the telegraph, daily newspapers could now publish next-day accounts of speeches, elections, and battles. So media was able to be portrayed almost instantly. The economy and society by the 1830s. American society was still largely rural in the 1830s. Most Americans lived on farms or in small rural villages. Very few Americans lived in the cities. Now, most farmers still grew crops to meet their own needs, although the market for cash crops was growing in importance. Patterns of work and family life were nonetheless beginning to be affected by the rise of the industry. The Industrial Revolution changed the American economy and affected the way people lived. These changes occurred at the different places in the United States at different times. The nature of work. The mass production of goods in factories required new work habits. Pre-industrial craftsmen had worked at home and performed a variety of tasks. They could now divide their time between the tasks if they wished. Factory work was tedious and monotonous. Workers, including children, often performed the same simple tasks for 12 hours each day. Factory work was also highly disciplined. Workers had to arrive at the factory on time and pay close attention to their work throughout the day. In 1820, there were only 350,000 factory workers in the United States. By 1860, there were already 2 million. Talk about a change. In only 40 years, too. The working conditions of women and children. During these years, women were an important part of the workforce. Farm women, had to work on the field as well as cook, clean, make clothes, and care for their children. Other women started working outside the home as servants, laundresses, cooks, or even factory workers. With the rise of industry, even more women found work outside the house. For example, the Lowell factories in New England employed young single women as workers. Children were expected to respect and obey their parents. Often they worked on the farm in addition to helping with the household chores. With the rise of the industry, some children even worked long hours in mines and factories. Industrial society was also required more educated leaders and managers. People became more aware of childhood as a distinct stage of life with its own special needs. America's first age of reform. The period from the 1820s to the Civil War witnessed the growth of several new reform movements. The spread of Jacksonian democracy, as well as the new challenges of industrialization, helped stimulate these movements. The religious revival, which is the Second Great Awakening. There was a revival of strong religious feelings, sometimes called the Second Great Awakening. Methodists, Baptists, and other Protestant groups held outdoor religious sermons and won new converts. The New England Protestant emphasized the ability of each person to achieve salvation. I can't even talk, guys. I'm so sorry. I'm acting like Gibson. See, I can't even talk. I can't even talk. Javi, I understand. They borrowed the tactics of mass politics, setting up mass meetings, giving out handbills, advertising in newspapers, and printing religious pamphlets. Roving preachers set up circuit routes throughout rural areas where they were set up in camps. New Protestant groups like the Mormons in upstate New York also appeared. Members of these groups saw social reform as part of God's plan. This new religious movement centered on reform, repairing moral injustices. The Second Great Awakening, being as moralistic as it was, played an important role in stirring reform movements to end slavery, reform prison, and ban alcoholic beverages. The abolitionist, what's an abolitionist? Quick quiz. I can't hear you, so I hope that you said it is someone who opposes slavery. One of the first targets of reform greatly encouraged the Protestant evangelist was slavery. Reformers known as abolitionists sought to end slavery, so to get rid of it. You will learn more about the abolitionists in the next chapter. Prison reform. When Andrew Jackson became president, America's prisons generally did not try to reform their prisoners. Most city and county jails punished criminals by simply placing drunks, thieves, and murderers together in one large room. Debtors were also sometimes thrown into prison. Prisons were often dirty and unhealthy, and some prisons required their inmates to keep a strict silence. Guards beat their prisoners, and food was of poor quality. Reformers campaigned for better prison conditions in the 1830s and 1840s. Based on the view that criminals could be rehabilitated. It's one of them days. It is. It's just one of those days. Because I know how to say it, and I can't say it. Rehabilitated. I can't even say it. I'm so tired, guys. I'm running out on myself. Eliza Farnham was the warden of a women's prison in New York State in the 1840s. She believed in treating prisoners fairly. She allowed prisoners to talk, opened a prison library, and established a school within the prison to teach prisoners to read and write. Improved treatment for mental illness. Dorothea Dix. If you cannot remember this, Dorothea Dix and the improvement for mental illness. In the 1800s, most people lacked the knowledge needed to care for those with mental illness. Mentally ill patients were locked in unheated rooms, chained to their beds, and beaten into obedience. Some were even sent to jail. Dorothea Diggs, which we just talked about, led the fight for better treatment for the mentally ill. She was distressed to learn that they were often housed with criminals or abused. Her report to the state legislative of Massachusetts revealed these shocking conditions. Dix toured other states to report on their treatment of the mentally ill. Dix also campaigned for general prison reform. Some states established separate buildings to house those with mental disorders, while other patients were permitted to work outdoors or to even enjoy recreation. Further improvements in treatment were delayed until mental illness was better understood in the next century. Temperance movement. Many Americans worried about drinking alcoholic beverages ruining their life, disrupting family life, leading to unemployment, and promoting the ungodly behavior. Some Protestant preachers denounced drinking alcohol as a sin. In 1826, the American Temperance Society was founded. Its chief objective changed from moderation to total abstinence, which means to get rid of it! Get rid of it! In 1851, Maine became the first state to ban alcohol, to get rid of alcohol, to not allow you to purchase it, use it, whatever. Education, the common school movement. Before the Industrial Revolution, most American children received little formal schooling. Wealthy children were taught to read, write, and arithmetic, as well as foreign languages and prayer, and they had a private tutor. Reformers like Horace Mann, the man that sounds like a horse, and a man, of Massachusetts fought to provide free public elementary school to every child. He and other reformers, instead of elementary school, should be both free and compulsory. These reformers wanted American children of all social classes to mix together in the same common school. Mann also introduced the first schools to train teachers. So essentially what he did was he set up schools to allow all of the children to be able to participate. But he also allowed for a school to train the teachers that he was wanting to be in the classroom to help out with these students. Women's rights movement. In the middle of 1800s, men held most positions in authority in the American society. Women were generally excluded, which means that they weren't part of it, from public life, left in charge of the home and children. So they were expected to be at home with the children to take care of them. Men held final authority, meaning that they basically had the right to say whatever they wanted, both in the household decisions and in public life. Women were denied. They didn't get it. They were denied equality of citizenship. They lacked the right to vote or to hold public office. So if you take a minute, read through what is in that kind of gray highlighted square. Some women began to see this lack of equality and opportunity as a serious problem that also needed reform. Women reformers began to organize themselves as the struggle for equality. Some women, and please take note of this, some women, Elizabeth Cady Stanton, Lucretia Mott, and other reformers organized the Seneca Falls Convention in New York in 1848. This convention passed the Declaration of Sentiments. It called on men not to withhold a woman's right, take her property, or refuse her right to vote. The Seneca Falls Convention was treated with scorn by the press and many religious leaders. Despite this, the Declaration of Sentiments was a major turning point. It launched the movement to change women's roles in America's life. The focus on women's right movement quickly turned to securing suffrage, which is the right to vote. The fact that women did not have the right to vote was seen as a recognition of their inferior status in society. Women reformers saw this denial as a violation of basic democratic principles. 215 is a very important page that you need to make sure that you fill out. Page 215. Literature and art. This video is going on long, guys, and I apologize, but trying to talk this much is getting to me. During this period, such masterpieces as the Nathaniel Hawthorne's The Scarlet Letter and The House of Seven Gables, Herman Melville's Moby Dick, Henry David Thoreau's Walden, and Walt Whitman, Leaves of Grass, was published. Washington Irving, the author of stories about the old New York, such as Rip Van Winkle and the Headless Horseman, was the first American writer to achieve fame in Europe. Irving was followed by James Fenimore Cooper, author of the adventure story The Last of the Mohicans. Nathaniel Hawthorne wrote The Puritan New England, while Herman Melville's novel about whaling, Moby Dick, is considered by many to be the greatest American novel ever written. The whaling ship was seen as a metaphor for the United States. Edgar Allan Poe perfected the art of writing suspenseful short stories. And if you have not had the chance to read an Edgar Allan Poe short story, I suggest you do it. They're quite amazing. And if you haven't read Moby Dick, I suggest you do that too. American Art, a group of New York City-based landscape painters known as the Hudson River School. Okay, guys, this actually popped up on the couple of Checkpoint, as well as, I want to say, the DBA. So, Hudson River School. Please read through that, highlight it, mark it up, understand it. But it was a group of New York City-based landscape painters who flourished in these same years. The school was founded in 1825 by Thomas Cole, who was an English immigrant, which means that he moved in. Now, many of their paintings were inspired by nature. So, just to understand that. Rather than using nature as a mere backdrop for history, paintings, or portraits, nature took center stage in their canvases. Excuse me. It's really getting to me, guys. I'm sorry. Their scenes show the power and beauty of America's wilderness. Human figures were almost dwarfed into insignificance by the majesty and grand proportions of nature. Their art interpreted themes of discovery and exploration and played a key role in helping to change America's view of nature. Their landscapes promoted a more sympathetic view of nature and have even encouraged further Western expansion. Other artists, Frederick Edwin Church, Albert Bernstein, Thomas Moran, and Asher Durand, are also artists of the Hudson River School. American artist James Audubon drew birds, mammals, plants, and other subjects from nature. From 1820 to 1838, he drew hundreds of species of birds, giving special attention to the relationship between animals and their habitats. His Birds of America, containing life-size portraits of 1,065 individual birds, that's quite a bit, is the most important work on birds ever published. Audubon's works in pastel show what American wildlife and woodlands were like before the spread of human settlement. He was also responsible for the discovery of many new species of North American birds and mammals. His influence on birds and natural history was far-reaching. Most later works about birds were in some way inspired by his artistry. Despite a few errors in his observations, he took notes, making up one of the most important contributions to our understanding of anatomy and behavior of birds. And with that, it is the end of Chapter 11. So if you would not mind, finish up with what you need to do with Chapter 11 concept map and chapter study cards. Then, please make your way through the understanding of the questions. Now, I will give you time, as much as I can allow, for tomorrow to make sure that you have Chapter 11 done. Do your best to get this thing in, okay? I know this is running on quite a little bit of time, but trust me, it's worth it, okay? Alright. I'm going to check off here, and I'm going to see y'all in the morning. Alright. Take care, y'all.